The civil lawsuit filed against Garth Brooks yesterday in California makes multiple serious allegations against the...
For millions of fans, Garth Brooks is simply the biggest name country music has ever produced. The cowboy hat, the sold-out stadiums, the voice that turned a college javelin thrower from Oklahoma into the best-selling solo artist in American history. But underneath the record deals and the platinum plaques sits a far messier story, one built on quiet sacrifice, a marriage that fame slowly picked apart, the sudden loss of the people who shaped him, and a legal storm that has followed him into his 60s. At 64 years old, Garth Brooks is still filling stadiums, still breaking sales records nobody thought could be broken again, and still carrying wounds that never fully closed. This is the real story behind the legend. Troy Garth Brooks entered the world on February 7, 1962, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the youngest of 6 kids raised in the small town of Yukon, just outside Oklahoma City. His mother, Colleen Carroll, wasn't just a housewife. She had actually cut records for Capitol Records years earlier and appeared on television variety programs in the 1950s before stepping back from show business to raise her family. His father, Troy Raymond Brooks, spent his career as a draftsman in the oil business, a steady, practical man who nonetheless sat his son down and taught him his first chords on the guitar. Between the two of them, young Garth grew up pulled in 2 directions at once. A mother who modeled the idea that a regular Oklahoma kid could actually make it in music, and a father who insisted that any dream worth chasing needed discipline behind it, not just talent. Family sing-alongs were a regular fixture in the house. Guitars and banjos passed hand to hand around the living room, long before anyone imagined where that music might eventually lead. Colleen and Troy raised their kids in a house where practicality and creativity were expected to coexist rather than compete with each other. Being the youngest of 6 meant Garth grew up watching his older siblings navigate their own paths first, absorbing lessons about patience and about earning attention in a busy, crowded household long before he ever stepped onto a stage in front of strangers. That upbringing, by his own account in later interviews, taught him early on that talent alone wasn't enough. You had to work for whatever room you wanted in the world, a mindset that stuck with him through every stage of his career. Music wasn't the obvious path early on, though. In high school, Garth was better known as an athlete, competing in football, baseball, and track. It was actually a javelin scholarship that got him into Oklahoma State University, not a music scholarship. But somewhere between practices, he and his college roommate, future country artist Ty England, started playing small gigs in local bars around Stillwater, and Garth discovered he had a knack for holding a room's attention that no track meet had ever given him. He graduated in 1984 with a degree in advertising, a choice that leaned more toward his father's philosophy of a safe, sensible career than toward chasing a stage. The music pull never really went away, though, and in 1985 he packed up and drove to Nashville to give it a shot. It did not go well. Overwhelmed and rejected almost everywhere he turned around and drove back home after less than a full day in town, a humbling defeat that could easily have ended the whole idea right there. Instead, he went back to playing local clubs, married his college girlfriend Sandy Mal in 1986, and kept working toward another shot. That second attempt came in 1987, when he moved to Nashville for good, determined to make it stick this time. Record labels turned him down one after another until a 1988 songwriters' night at the legendary Bluebird Cafe changed everything. A Capitol Records executive named Lynn Schultz happened to be in the crowd that night, not even there to see Garth, but to scout a completely different act that never showed. Schultz heard Garth instead, and within a short time, Garth had a record deal. It's worth pausing on just how narrow that window of opportunity actually was. Nashville in the mid-1980s was crowded with talented singers who never got a single showcase, let alone a Bluebird Cafe slot that happened to catch the right executive on the right night. Garth has said in later interviews that he came close to giving up entirely after that first failed trip to Nashville in 1985, and it took real convincing from Sandy and from friends back home to get him to try again 2 years later. The gap between total rejection and a signed record deal was, by his own account, thinner than most people realize, a matter of timing as much as talent. His self-titled debut album dropped in April 1989, mixing traditional country storytelling with the kind of big, arena rock energy country audiences hadn't really heard before. It produced his first #1 single, If Tomorrow Never Comes, and reached #2 on the Billboard Country Albums chart. But it was his second album, No Fences, released in 1990, that turned him into a phenomenon. 23 weeks at #1 and an anthem, Friends in Low Places. That became one of the most recognizable sing-alongs in American music. From there, Garth Brooks' concerts stopped looking like typical country shows. He wore wireless headset mics, ran across the stage, swung from rigging, and brought a rock and roll spectacle to venues that had never seen anything like it. Even controversy worked in his favor. The music video for The Thunder Rolls, which depicted domestic violence, got pulled from major country video channels for its graphic content, and the band only made people more curious, pushing the song higher up the charts. By the time the dust settled on his most explosive run of years, Garth Brooks had sold more than 150 million albums in the United States alone, a number that made him the best-selling solo artist in American history, ahead of names like Elvis Presley. He picked up Grammy Awards, well over a dozen American Music Awards, and a record 7 wins for the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year, a total no other artist has matched before or since. Albums like Rope in the Wind, The Chase, and In Pieces each moved multiple millions of copies at a time when the entire music industry was reshaping itself around the idea that a country artist could sell like a rock star. What made the run even more remarkable is how deliberately unglamorous Garth kept insisting his own image should be. He wasn't interested in projecting perfection. His stage shows were built around raw physical effort, sprinting across risers, climbing rigging, smashing guitars, because he wanted audiences to see someone working as hard as they did at their own jobs, not a polished, untouchable star. That blue-collar honesty became as much a part of the brand as the music itself, and it's part of why so many fans describe feeling like they know him personally, even decades removed from those arena tours. Long before any of that success, Garth met Sandy Mal in the strangest possible way, inside the restroom of the Tumbleweed Ballroom in Stillwater, Oklahoma, during a bar fight where Mal, working as a bouncer at the venue, ended up with her fist jammed into a wood panel. It wasn't romantic in any traditional sense, but something about that chaotic first encounter turned into a real connection. What made Sandy different, by Garth's own account over the years, was that she wasn't dazzled by ambition or performance. She saw him as a person first, not a future star, and that grounded quality mattered enormously to a young man still finding his footing. She even co-wrote 2 of his early songs, including I've Got a Good Thing Going, and the later track That Summer. Proof that their bond ran deeper than romance alone. It was creative, too. The two married on May 24, 1986, just before Garth made his permanent move to Nashville. 3 daughters followed over the next decade. Taylor Maine Pearl in 1992, August Anna in 1994, and Allie Colleen in 1996. Garth has said many times since that his 3 girls represent his single greatest accomplishment, far outweighing any chart record or trophy case. But fatherhood collided head-on with the demands of superstardom. Between 1989 and 1993, at the peak of his rise, he was on the road as many as 300 days a year. That left Sandy managing virtually everything at home alone: school runs, doctor's visits, sleepless nights, while her husband performed for tens of thousands of strangers on the other side of the country. What looked, from the outside, like the most triumphant stretch of his career was quietly becoming the most difficult stretch of his marriage. Sandy later explained, in a 2019 documentary about Garth's life, that the man who came home from tour often felt like a stranger to her. Not cruel, not distant on purpose, just fundamentally changed by the machine he was now part of. Weeks on the road stretched into months, and even his time at home increasingly got swallowed by award shows, promotional obligations, and industry events. Garth has since admitted, with some regret, that he didn't fully grasp how isolating those years were for Sandy at the time. He was too caught up in the momentum of his own career to see it clearly. The marriage officially ended in November 2000, when Garth filed for divorce in Tennessee, citing irreconcilable differences after a long separation. Speaking to press at the time, he described the split as a mutual, amicable decision, with both of them focused on protecting their daughters from unnecessary pain. The final settlement, finalized in December 2001, reportedly awarded Sandy around $125 million, making it one of the most expensive celebrity divorces on record at that point. Even with all that financial complexity, the two managed something rare, a genuinely functional co-parenting arrangement. For years, custody switched every single day at set times, morning and evening, giving their three daughters a surprisingly stable routine despite their parents' public and expensive split. People close to the family have said over the years that Garth and Sandy made a conscious decision early on not to let their divorce turn into a public war, something that stood out at a time when celebrity splits regularly played out through dueling interviews and leaked details. Sandy largely stepped out of the spotlight after the divorce, choosing a quieter life away from the entertainment industry, while Garth continued crediting her, even years later, with grounding him during the early, most disorienting stretch of his fame. Loss struck Garth from another direction that same era. His mother, Colleen, passed away from cancer in August 1999, the same woman whose own brief brush with a music career had first planted the idea in his head that a kid from Oklahoma could actually sing for a living. Her death hit him so hard that he announced his full retirement from music at a press conference that October, walking away from the business entirely to focus on raising his daughters. A decade later, in 2010, his father Troy passed away as well, a former oilfield draftsman and Marine veteran who had instilled in Garth the belief that nothing worth having comes without real sacrifice. Losing both parents within roughly a decade of each other took away two of the steadiest voices he'd had in his life. Honoring his mother's memory even turned into an unexpected legal fight. Back in 2005, Garth donated $500,000 to a hospital near Yukon, Oklahoma, on the understanding that a women's health center there would eventually carry her name. When that promise went unfulfilled, he filed a breach of contract lawsuit in 2009. A jury ultimately sided with him in 2012, ordering the hospital to return the donation and pay an additional $500,000 in punitive damages. A small, deeply personal victory in the fight to keep his mother's legacy intact. Grief didn't stop there. In April 2025, his longtime songwriting collaborator Larry Bastian died at 90. Bastian, a former biologist turned songwriter during the Bakersfield sound era of the 1970s, had co-written some of Garth's most enduring hits, including Unanswered Prayers and Rodeo. Garth later called him a true friend and mentor, someone he'd leaned on since his earliest, most uncertain days in Nashville. And in February 2021, his second wife, Trisha Yearwood, contracted a severe case of COVID-19 during a household quarantine. Garth has spoken publicly about how frightened he was during that stretch, describing Trisha as the anchor of his entire life, and admitting he leaned heavily on prayer rather than any sense of control. She recovered fully, and the couple has since said that the fear and forced closeness of that period actually strengthened their marriage, pushing them to work through tensions they might otherwise have avoided. On top of all of it, a 2006 wildfire tore across Oklahoma and came dangerously close to the family ranch, a property holding decades of memories, forcing an emergency evacuation while firefighters worked to keep it from burning. Not every chapter of Garth's career has been smooth sailing, and some of it has been outright strange. In 1999, at the height of his fame, he launched an alter ego project under the name Chris Gaines, a slick-back, soul-patched, falsetto-singing rock persona meant to promote a film that never actually got made. Longtime fans were baffled. The album sold a modest 2 million copies, a fraction of what his previous records had done, and today the entire Chris Gaines chapter is largely left out of his official career retrospectives. Looking back, the Chris Gaines experiment is one of the few moments in his career Garth has spoken about with genuine embarrassment rather than nostalgia. He's since described it as a well-intentioned creative swing that simply didn't land, and while the character never returned, one of the songs from that album, Lost in You, did go on to become a modest hit in its own right, a small silver lining in an otherwise widely mocked chapter of his career. A much bigger public disaster hit in 2014, when 5 sold-out concerts were scheduled at Dublin's Croke Park Stadium, a venue usually reserved for Irish sporting events. All 400,000 tickets sold within a single day. But when city officials only approved 3 of the 5 nights, citing noise and residential concerns in the surrounding neighborhoods. Garth issued an all-or-nothing ultimatum, arguing that playing only 3 of the 5 sold-out nights would be unfair to whichever fans ended up shut out. When that wasn't accepted, every single show was canceled outright. It left roughly 400,000 furious fans without concerts, cost the Irish tourism and hospitality industry millions in lost revenue, and turned into one of the more painful public relations episodes of his entire career. 8 years later, in September 2022, Dublin finally approved all 5 shows, and every ticket sold out again almost instantly. Garth later admitted to taking several emotional breaks during the very first night back, visibly overwhelmed by the moment. Fans who'd held onto their and used 2014 tickets were given priority access, turning years of heartbreak into one of the more celebrated comeback stories of his touring career. Just as it seemed the worst chapters were behind him, an entirely new and far more serious storm arrived. In September 2024, Garth's legal team filed a preemptive lawsuit in Mississippi under the pseudonym John Doe, attempting to get ahead of a complaint being prepared by a woman referred to in filings as Jane Roe, a hairstylist and makeup artist who had worked with both Garth and Trisha Yearwood for years, reportedly since the late 1990s in Trisha's case, and since around 2017, directly with Garth. The following month, Jane Roe filed a formal civil lawsuit in Los Angeles alleging sexual assault, including a claim that Garth assaulted her in a hotel suite during a 2019 trip connected to a Grammy tribute event. Garth has denied every part of the allegations, describing the lawsuit as an attempted extortion scheme and saying the accusations felt like a weapon aimed directly at him and his family. His legal team has claimed the accuser's attorneys sent a private demand for a large financial settlement before the lawsuit was ever filed, something he says pushed him to sue first in order to get ahead of the story. The decision to name the accuser publicly in an amended filing drew sharp criticism from legal experts and sparked backlash of its own, with Roe's attorneys arguing that naming her amounted to retaliation against an alleged victim of sexual violence. Garth's team has since pushed for a faster resolution, pointing to the death of a longtime publicist believed to be a key witness, and arguing that fading memories make delay especially damaging, though courts have not moved to speed things up on that basis. As of the middle of 2026, the case remains unresolved. A California judge declined to dismiss the lawsuit outright, but has effectively paused proceedings there while a first-filed case in Mississippi works through its own motions, leaving the two courts locked in a jurisdictional standoff over which one should actually decide the underlying claims. No trial date has been set, no settlement has been publicly confirmed, and both sides continue to stand firmly by their original positions after nearly 2 years of filings and legal maneuvering. Much of the paperwork on the Mississippi side has remained sealed from public view, which has only added to the uncertainty and speculation swirling around the case. It's worth being clear about one thing. This is a civil case, not a criminal one, and Garth Brooks maintains his complete innocence throughout every stage of the ongoing process. The lawsuit has inevitably followed him into every public appearance since it became news, with reporters and fans alike bringing it up around tour stops, award ceremonies, and interviews that would otherwise have focused entirely on his music. Garth has largely tried to keep the two worlds separate, addressing the legal situation only through formal statements from his attorneys, while continuing to perform as if nothing had changed on stage. Whether that separation holds up over the coming months, as the jurisdictional dispute eventually gets resolved one way or another, remains one of the open questions hanging over the back half of his career. Long before any of the legal turmoil, a quieter, second love story had already been taking shape. Garth and Trisha Yearwood actually first met back in 1987, years before either of them became household names, recording a demo together in a Nashville studio while both were still married to other people. It wasn't until years later, after both had gone through divorces, that their friendship deepened into something more. Garth proposed to her on stage at Buck Owens's Crystal Palace in Bakersfield, California, in front of a stunned, cheering crowd who had no idea history was unfolding right in front of them. They married on December 10, 2005. Between 2000 and 2005, Garth stepped almost entirely away from full-time touring to focus on raising his daughters in Oklahoma, trading stadium tours for school drop-offs and youth sports games. He has repeatedly described that stretch not as a sacrifice, but as one of the greatest gifts of his life. When he returned to full-time performing, it was on a scale that matched his earlier peak. A major stadium tour drew crowds averaging close to 100,000 fans per city, following an earlier arena tour with Trisha that sold millions of tickets over several years on the road. A Las Vegas residency at Caesars Palace sold out nearly every seat across dozens of shows completed in early 2025, proving that even after decades in the industry, demand for a live Garth Brooks show hadn't cooled off in the slightest. Along the way, he's picked up a Kennedy Center honor and the Library of Congress's Gershwin Prize for Popular Song, adding to an already staggering collection of lifetime achievement recognitions that place him among a small handful of American musicians recognized at that level. Touring at this stage of his career looks different than it did in his 20s and 30s, by his own admission, where earlier decades were defined by constant motion and barely any time at home. His later tours have been built around longer breaks between legs, giving him more time with Trisha and with his now adult daughters. It's a rhythm he said he wishes he'd found sooner, though he's also been careful not to frame his younger years of non-stop touring as a mistake, just a different season of a very long career. Recent years have brought fresh milestones, even with the ongoing legal cloud hanging overhead, a strange but very real contrast that has defined this latest stretch of his career, triumphant on stage and unresolved everywhere else. In 2026, Garth reached diamond certification on multiple albums, an achievement almost no other recording artist in history has come close to matching. That same year, he returned to British soil for the first time in decades, headlining BST Hyde Park in London on June 27, 2026, a homecoming show that reportedly became the single biggest event in the festival's history, with tickets so in demand that organizers had to expand capacity. Behind the scenes, people close to Garth have said the ongoing legal proceedings continue to weigh on him, even as his public performances keep drawing massive, adoring crowds night after night. In quieter moments, he spends time running a Nashville entertainment venue called Friends in Low Places, complete with a rooftop bar, palm trees, and live music most evenings, a place where he can greet fans and support up-and-coming musicians, away from courtrooms and touring schedules alike. Those close to the venue have described it as something closer to a passion project than a business investment, a way for Garth to stay connected to the city that made his career possible without the pressure of a full arena tour attached to it. Fans visiting Nashville regularly report spotting him there unannounced, chatting with tourists and signing autographs the way he might have decades earlier, before stadium tours and legal filings made every public appearance a carefully managed event. It's a small, deliberate reminder that underneath the record certifications and the courtroom headlines, he still seems most at ease with a guitar in his hands and a room full of strangers singing along. At 64, Garth Brooks' story is nowhere close to a tidy, closed chapter. It's a life built on both extraordinary highs and genuinely painful lows, the collapse of a first marriage under the weight of his own fame, the loss of both parents within a single decade, a costly public controversy, a triumphant comeback, and now a legal battle still playing out in real time. But through every single one of those chapters, one thing has stayed constant. He keeps showing up on stage, keeps singing, and keeps moving forward. From a hospital room in Tulsa to sold-out stadiums across the globe, the real story of Garth Brooks has never been as simple as the cowboy hat and the anthem everybody knows the words to. What do you think the future holds for a legend still fighting to protect the legacy he spent decades building? Let us know in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories behind the biggest names in music.